Hi, my name is Mark Walker. I'm the editorial director of the Fintech Times, and we're here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at Seamless. And we're producing a video today for Seamless TV. And I've got a great interviewee here, which I'm going to ask to introduce herself to you.
Hello, my name is Ngozi Megwa. I am the Senior Vice President of Digital Partnerships and Enablers at Mastercard. And I cover the Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa region.
Fantastic. So that's quite a nice region to be looking after, especially at the moment.
Absolutely.
Obviously, with the payments taking such a primary sort of role, what are the key sort of trends that you're seeing in the region at the moment?
Yeah. So I think, obviously before the pandemic, digital payments were growing at an exponential rate. But of course, post-pandemic, we've seen that really take off. But when you look at it from one of the trends we're seeing from a consumer perspective is the fact that they're now wanting a lot more embedded experiences. But even before, why is that? The reason for that is they've obviously embraced the concept of digital payments. And actually, we did some research recently. We did a study called the New Payments Index, and over 85% of consumers in MENA have used a digital payment product in the last year or so. So that drive is obviously fueling them to want to experience it in a different way, and now wanting more embedded experiences. What does that really mean? They want something that's a bit more personalized and contextualized that meets their needs. But so that's the first trend we're seeing, obviously, consumers wanting more and experimenting more. Then the second thing we're seeing, obviously, is this whole digital wave is also translating into the B2B space. And B2B customer segments are now wanting to go a lot more digital. So that's fueling the drive for big tech firms and fintechs to really think about what are those innovative business models that can serve the SME space, right? And as we all know, in MENA and across our emerging markets, SMEs are the backbone of our economy. They represent between 80 to 95% of, the retail transactions. So that's the second trend we're seeing. Now, with all of that, so non-cash transactions growing and everyone going digital and virtual, authenticating consumers or merchants or users of the service becomes more important. So digital ID infrastructure, a robust digital ID infrastructure is becoming top of mind. Then finally, of course, we're seeing an explosion of fintechs and growth across our region. And it's interesting that wherever you look, whether you're talking, MENA or you're talking Africa in emerging markets, there's significant amounts of venture capital going into growing the fintech base, and they're really meeting various needs across the ecosystem. Now, of course, that means that these fintechs need to be able to lean into what we call hygiene factor when it comes to payments. So they need to have solid processing infrastructure. They need to be thinking of API-based models. They need to be thinking of how to use data. Now, with all of that comes, when you now have this wide ecosystem of people sharing data, cybersecurity becomes very important. So that's the other trend we're seeing.
Okay, there's quite a lot to pick apart from that. So lots of interesting things. One of the ones that I wanted to maybe go back to is you mentioned sort of data, and obviously here in the Kingdom, open banking is quite a sort of a big feature of the 2030 vision. How does Mastercard play into that sort of space? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think the best way to think of data is, in terms of what are the new business models it can open up, right? And how can you use it safely and securely? And I think that's where artificial intelligence comes in. So if you really think about it, artificial intelligence really combines this explosion of data, which you would expect will come from solutions like open banking and increased computing power, to almost mirror human cognitive abilities. So data is playing a very key role in powering the role of artificial intelligence in emerging markets. And artificial intelligence is, of course, as we know, starting to really shape how we innovate, right? What sort of business models can we bring into the market? How do we bridge certain gaps in emerging markets? How do we make business processes more efficient? So that's how I would really like to look at data. And I think from a Mastercard perspective, of course, as a global network in the payments industry, we sit on a wealth of payments data. So we're able to help our partners all over the world to make sense of the data, to understand their consumers better, to manage their businesses better. But it's not just about payments data. When you think of, we invest in a lot of AI-based platforms, it's how you bring that data together with existing data in other ecosystems to actually then combined with AI-based thinking to actually start to make business models more innovative.
It's kind of like enriching the data with institutional data as well.
And of course with the explosion, of computing power, as we know, and as you say, right, as the ecosystem goes towards more platformification and open banking, what does that mean? That means you're now creating this network where you're sitting on data from different sources. So how do you make sense of that data, but in a secure and safe way? And this is where Mastercard comes in with our technology, with our experience to really power that.
Okay, and just thinking a little bit about your region, it's a little bit, I wouldn't say it's like Europe, but it's quite different in different areas, isn't it? How do you see, obviously with Mastercard, I guess you have like an overall view. What do you see as the main differences in trends between, say, the GCC, the Kingdom, and into maybe Kenya or sort of Egypt areas?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that, and I'll pick a common thread, growth of fintech, right? So because of the trends I spoke about earlier, it's, if you look at the ecosystem, you have the large big tech companies like the telecom operators, for example. Then you have the large e-tailers, as an example. Then you have fintechs, right? They're all playing a role in this ecosystem, and they're all wanting to provide consumers with these embedded, personalized experiences I spoke about. But the big firms can't do it on their own, right? So even at Mastercard, right, we are a technology company in the global payments industry, and of course we invest millions of dollars in bringing technology to bear. But as the industry evolves, we need to power fintechs, right? To be able to, we need to partner with fintechs, actually, in addition to powering them, to be able to meet the capability gap. So going back to your question, there's an explosion of fintech. Why? Because fintechs are needed to bridge some capability gaps that exist in the ecosystem to allow us to leapfrog where developing markets are. So MENA, for example, there's a growth of fintech in data, artificial intelligence, right? Digital payments. Africa, on the other hand, there's a growth of fintechs in the same place, but more in the SME side, right? Because Africa obviously has a very, I would say the levels of cash penetration in Africa are significantly higher than more of the GCC and emerging markets. And because SMEs really play a role in Africa, the fintech world in Africa is really about how do you digitize the cash flows in the ecosystem. And because SMEs play such a key role, fintechs are zoning in on enabling the SMEs with technology to help that. So to answer your question, or to summarize, I think there's a growth of fintech in both MENA and Africa. There's a higher focus on SMEs in Africa just because there's a bigger role for fintechs to play in displacing cash through SME solutions. But as MENA is a little bit more developed, data, artificial intelligence, more advanced forms of digital payments, fund transfers, crypto payments are a little bit more prevalent.
Okay, that kind of begs the question of, with so much innovation happening, how do you keep on top of it? How do you keep an understanding of what's going on where?
So it's interesting. I think at Mastercard we are, of course, we continue to invest in our platforms and assets and capabilities, but it's important for us also to be intentional about the types of partnerships we have to help us keep on top of things. So we partner with the big tech firms, the big e-tailers, because of course we have capabilities that meet their needs, but also we know that they are really, if you think of the telcos, they are really pushing the boundaries when it comes to payments, or even the e-tailers. So it's important for us to partner with them to be very close to, how the industry is evolving from their perspective, but also in the back end, partner with fintechs as well, who can help shore up our capabilities to meet those needs. And so if you look at our partnership model, we're very intentional about the partnerships. For example, if you look at the fintech space, we have this global fintech program called StartPath. And there we bring together fintechs from all over the world, of course, bring them together in an ecosystem that allows them to learn from each other, learn from us. I think since 2014, when we launched this program, we have mentored about 300 fintech companies, and they've gone on to raise close to $5 billion in venture capital. So it's a melting pot of co-creation, innovation, knowledge sharing, learning, but also it gives us at Mastercard the opportunity to be on top of what's going on out there and leverage some of their capability to continue to buttress what we have to serve the bigger players in the ecosystem.
Makes sense. You kind of alluded to a little bit earlier in the conversation a recent white paper that you've developed.
Yes.
And I guess that's one of the methods that you use to gather information, share and ask for feedback.
Absolutely. So we do that across different segments. I mentioned the new payments index, which is where we're kind of trying to figure out, okay, so how are consumers and merchants leaning into digital payments? And on the fintech side, the white paper you spoke about, we actually did one focusing on MENA and one focusing on Africa. And no surprise, the findings in the MENA one, fintech is growing massively, whether Africa or MENA. Like I said at the beginning, in MENA, there's a lot more emphasis in the fintech population on emerging technology, just because of the maturity of the region. And actually, in the white paper, we've identified that there will be at least 45 large fintech unicorns in MENA in the next couple of years, right? So it's a very interesting space. And I think there's a need I think events like this are important because there's a need for us to continue to look at partnerships, right? How do we partner across the ecosystem to further accelerate and buttress the growth in digital payments, which, like I mentioned, Mastercard is doing very well with the big players, but as well as fintechs.
That's really great. That actually leads quite nicely into my final question, was actually about Seamless and how you found the event, actually.
No, it's really exciting. I mean, you just need to look at the exhibitor map and see the range of different fintech partnerships that are present here, ranging from the big players to the smaller players. But I think I love coming to events like this because, to your point, right, it also gives you a sense of what are the new things coming up, right? What are the types of partnerships that we might want to be looking at that we're not aware of, right? So it really keeps us at the heart of things and enables us to keep our pulse on what's going on in the industry. So events like this are great for that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us here at Seamless TV, powered by the Fintech Times.
Thank you for having me.